Welcome everyone to our last day of our program, in which we're going to talk about the employee of the future. How do we lead them? What does it mean? What does it mean from the management perspective? What does it mean from the people perspective? What does it mean from the tools perspective? And our first speaker is our great friend, Aprajita, who's the chief brand evangelist at Google. She's been with Google for 17 years, right? Aprajita, I'm right.
Yeah.
Okay, for 17 years. And she works with the Google sales team and customers to help grow customer brands through digital marketing. Her prior roles, she has focused on various performance marketing solutions, including search, dynamic remarketing, prospecting, and mobile solutions for some of Google's largest advertisers in the retail and travel industries. She is live from Germany. So, Brigitte, off to you.
Thank you so much, Las. Very, very pleased to meet all of you. I have heard a lot about your business in the preparation that I was having with the Silicon Valley Innovation Center team, but also I was doing some research on your website. And today's topic really is meant to be conversational. So don't think that just because I brought slides, I'm going to speak at you. I want to speak with you and really understand what are the issues that you're facing, what are the top of mind questions. And hopefully from my experience in the Silicon Valley and particularly at Google, I can help address some of those questions live, even if they are not on a slide. But beginning with where my head is at when I think of what the future of work and with that, the future of leadership may look like, we have seen what I call a wholesale abandonment of office space. It's one of the most striking fallouts of the pandemic, other than the economic situation of individuals. And in my eyes, and everything that I'm hearing from the economists at our company, it will have a profound effect on the way we live and work, even long after the virus has been tamed. In New York, for example, new office space is coming on the market 59% leased, which is down from 74% leased prior to COVID. So clearly, the real estate market, not only residential, but also in terms of workspaces, is taking a big hit because of this. San Francisco went from its lowest ever office vacancy rate to its highest in the same year. This graph shows you exactly that trend from 2015 onwards. And office rents in San Francisco are set to decline by about 15%. And the worst may yet to become as companies are figuring out their remote work policies, as employees are raising their voices and making their preferences heard. So we don't know if this will actually further decline from here. Now, this is what the reality of the physical work environment looks like from a real estate perspective. Now, let's take a look at what it looks like from an employee choice perspective. So when I look at this was, again, a survey done by Live Cases. And when they asked their workers, would you rather work for somebody who permits some remote work? Would you prefer that? About 2/3 said yes, I would prefer working at an employer who allows me the flexibility to work remote, at least partly remote. And 29% of workers said they would quit if they did not have the possibility to go remote. So that's, I think the second stat here is a very crucial one, because these companies, I can tell from my experience at Google, we overinvest very heavily in recruiting the best talent. And if about 1/3 of them all of a sudden packs up their bags and says we're leaving, that is a major hit, not only to the work that we are doing at currently, but also to the future potential for the company. So that's why designing the right work arrangements for future workers is important, but also on a leadership level, communicating that change and making sure you're taking the right input and then delivering on those is extremely important for us at the company right now. Let's talk about a couple of areas that Vas and Irina told me were most important to you. So I focused my thoughts here on how do you in the first place hire the best talent, and that not just applies to a COVID situation, it even applies outside of that. Second, how do you defend your workforce from a talent war? Very important in the given moment, because every company is changing their policies, and some employees might connect better with one company's policy than another, especially in an area like Silicon Valley or in other hubs that you have around the world where the concentration of talented employees is very high. Usually the companies follow. There is a lot of presence of companies that are interchangeable in the employee's eyes. So switching from one to the next becomes extremely easy without a physical move necessarily. And with work from home, even if it means a physical headquarter move, it doesn't mean you have to move. And thirdly, we'll talk about managing a partly hybrid workforce. Many companies are trying this model. It has its pros and cons, so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then lastly, finding success measures that work. Really, given any situation that you're in, what is it that can keep your employees on the right track and really deliver for the company the way you have envisioned them to? Does that sound generally like a good agenda? Good topics to cover?
Sure, and maybe just for context for some of the folks on the BDO side were involved in this, but there was a series of conversations back at the end of last year and beginning of this year around kind of the firm of the future. And when we were doing this planning for this session back at that time, these were some of the main themes that were coming up as part of that. And this was kind of a joint conversation between two of our strategy teams, one focused on kind of digital transformation and innovation, and the other around exceptionally engaged employees. So we kind of put our heads together, and these were some of the big themes that kind of emerged from that at that point. So that's kind of where these came from.
Or
the fact that you thought about this last fall or last winter already, it is good, because these are definitely very hot topics in today's discussion for every people operations, as we call it, or HR team across the Valley. So hopefully we can, shed some light on this and see what the different models, what the different approaches are. Let's start with hiring the best talent. Again, this is not just limited to COVID. This is really universal. And I feel Google has spent a lot of time trying to figure this out, because you may have heard this, but we receive some insane amount of, like, I think 3 million applications a year. So how do you sift through that? And how do you make sure you're not getting any false positives, but you're ensuring you're really only hiring the people that will drive the company culture, but also the innovation that is required from the company? So let's get a little deeper into hiring the best talent. 3 pillars here. Local to global, that is a change that happens as a company grows. You are already a global company. Google became global over the last 20 years. When I joined, we were still very much a US company, but I've seen the growth, expand from other cities in the US to Europe to Asia. Like, we have 160 offices in over, I think, 46 countries now. So clearly there was a need to evaluate, how do we grow? How do we take the company from local to global? And one of the things that was always top of mind is, how do we keep teams together that need to be together? So there was a needs assessment in terms of, is co-location key to producing whatever that team is set out to do? Or would the team not suffer if we broke it out and distributed it across different locations? So that need assessment, sitting down with the leadership teams of those teams and really figuring out, would your project suffer in terms of the deliverable itself, the timeline, the quality, if we dispersed your team? And dispersion obviously comes with the benefit that, one, you have an easier time hiring across the globe versus just in one locality. But two, also, it can have cost benefits depending on your pay structure. And it can mean that you have more flexibility, right? Google projects, they change so frequently. It's not like you're working on the same project for years and years. Sometimes they change every 6 months, maybe more frequently. So having that flexibility in terms of locations really helps too. The second consideration is always, how can we differentiate by level of experience? Right? Sometimes it is easier to delegate remote work to people that have more tenure with the company, and not just tenure, but really experience on whatever project they're working on. And sometimes it's better if you're hiring new college grads to keep them closer to the core, because they're still in the learning phase, or they're being mentored by people from the team that are not dispersed. So those are kind of the 2 things that are top of mind when going from one to the other. The second pillar here, talent scarcity versus abundance. In the Silicon Valley, that is a big, big topic. Our headquarters is here for a reason, and you may have heard in the press, a lot of companies, Oracle and so on, and so Tesla, people are moving outside of the Silicon Valley and opening a second, or maybe sometimes even their first headquarters in other states in the US. some even globally, Google has very specifically made that decision to not move our headquarters because Silicon Valley is where we source our best talent, and we anticipate that we will continue sourcing that talent from here. There is something about this area, the flexibility to jump from one employer to the other, that will not be there if we moved our headquarters somewhere else. We also have this philosophy of paying for cost of labor versus paying for cost of living. So when you move from one Google office to another, your pay is evaluated on what the labor cost is in that particular city, and not whether you will have to pay more mortgage or more rent in a certain city. So that's, again, a pay philosophy that not a lot of companies have. Some have other types of adjustments. But as you look at where your talent pool is and where that abundance is, you have, as an HR team, more flexibility to set your own rules. In terms of future talent pipeline, that was, again, another consideration why we decided to stay in the Silicon Valley, because we knew some of the best universities that we have sourced from in the past are in this area. They're not going to move their campuses, so students are still going to come into the area, and that's why we wanted to stay close to them. And then also current employee needs, right? We as a company are maybe a little bit exceptional compared to maybe BDO, who has a more average age in terms of workforce. Google's workforce is still on the relatively younger side, but not young enough that they're single and able to just pack their bags and move anywhere. We are now at this stage where I believe our average age is around somewhere in the late 30s, which means a lot of people are now married, are having kids. Some of them have very young kids. They're tied to a school district, or they don't want to move their whole families. So that's another reason why we needed to make sure we have a substantial presence in the area we always used to be, because we cannot displace a whole lot of workforce all of a sudden. Lastly, getting interviewing right. And I literally put that on the slide because it is the most important thing you can do. As I mentioned earlier, with 3 million resumes, it's very easy to say, you know, we're going to sift through about 1/3 of them and then take our chances. We don't want to spend so much time on interviewing. We'll just take the ones that we feel might be a good fit. But we over-index on not necessarily making the interviews hard, but interviewing to an extent where we can absolutely, to like a 99% surety, say that we are weeding out the candidates that wouldn't work for us, even if that means that sometimes we let go of a candidate that would have actually made a good fit. So it's better to be more conservative upfront than regret that decision later, because one bad apple in the culture of the company can make a big difference. Also, one thing we ensure is it's not just the hiring manager and the hiring team members that do the interviews with new candidates. We have a system where we do 4 interviews at least. The first 3 are usually with the hiring manager and the hiring team itself. And the 4th one is always a cross-functional interview. So for example, if you're hiring for engineering, somebody from the cloud business development team might interview them, or somebody from the sales team might interview them. The reason is we don't want that 4th person to focus on the job-related skills of that person. Instead, we want to test for culture fit and for how adaptable is this person if they were to change roles in the next 6 months to a year. That happens very often within the company. So to ensure that that person would be, well attuned to the next job that they take, we make sure that a cross-functional person comes in and outside of their job skills, they really test them on, I call it the airport test personally. If I were stuck with this person at the airport for 5 hours because of flight delay, would I sit next to them and have a conversation with them about everything under the moon, or would I rather, go and have a drink somewhere? So that's the reason for that 4th interview. And lastly, we prefer hiring generalists over specialists. Now, I have to caveat this by saying if you're hiring for a tech role, or if you are hiring for a very specific role within the company where, let's say, you need accounting background or a certification even, obviously, you need to make sure that that piece exists. But in general, we prefer people that are not too niche in their thinking and rather adaptable and can deal with ambiguity, because as I said, our projects don't always last years. They are sometimes really short term. And as people move on, they need to have that appetite to learn and adapt to new situations. And that's why generalists are preferred over niche thinking. Any thoughts on this? How does this play out at BDO, and which of these are maybe some pain points right now?
Hi, this is Kathy Moy. I'm our Chief People Officer, and from all of your thoughts resonate with the things we've been thinking about and talking about. And I think one of our strategic moves is that we move from skill-based interviewing to behavioral interviewing, but taking it up a notch to cultural fit interviewing is sort of the next game. So that in particular we've been focused upon, because we do believe our culture is a competitive advantage, and we've scaled it pretty well. That we think that's a piece we maybe could up our game on testing for that fit at the front end.
Yeah, that's great, Kathy. In fact, one of the things that our people operations team did a lot of studies over the last 5-6 years, and in one of their studies, they found out that out of the top 5 success indicators for an employee and teams in general, the number 1 was psychological safety. So if if you do a survey with your employees and they rate psychological safety on their team to be high, and psychological safety really means I can walk into a conference room and feel like I'm accepted as a person and my opinions are not ridiculed, and I can speak up even if my opinion is that of a minority. If that's how I feel, I mark psychological safety as high, and those teams and those individuals perform at least 20% better than the rest of the employees. So screening for that early on, I think, is a good move. Great. Shall we then move on? And we can always go back and forth if you think of any other questions or comments later too.
One follow-on thought. Your thoughts around the cost of labor and versus cost of living, that this, we're about to get on the next, the next evolution of work from wherever, right? And so, I want to be on my ranch in Montana, but I'm still working for Google, and whether we pay any attention to where people are located, where their home address is versus what we're paying for a particular role, that'll be really, do they take a pay cut if they move out of the Silicon Valley cost of labor pool to a less expensive cost of labor pool? That's a whole nother set of philosophies and policies to track forward. Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, right now, I feel those policies are probably being rewritten more so than ever before. Exactly. We've seen this in the press. Even Facebook mentioned that, if you move to, and Facebook is offering a more liberal work from anywhere policy. And they said, if you move to anywhere outside of the Bay Area, you will get a pay cut. Now, they haven't announced how they're going to calculate this, if that's going to differ from area to area. But I feel that's an area where HR teams and compensation teams are going to have to think through very, very meticulously, because now the cost of labor thing doesn't matter anymore, right? You can get the same work out of me whether I'm working from here or somewhere else with all the technology that's available. But 2, now you're comparing me to a global talent pool and not necessarily to the talent pool in my labor area. I haven't seen any fabulous models on this is how it should be done yet, because it's just too early to say which model will stick. But I know that every company is putting their heads together on this topic for sure.
Totally. Just send us the link to the fabulous model as soon as you have it. Okay.
Yeah. Actually, there is a site called Rework. I think it's just rework.com, but if you just type in Google Rework, we publish all of our people operations studies on that site. So awesome. Quite possible that you will find it there at some point.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yes, of course. Right. So next here, defending your workforce from a talent war. Now that becomes, again, very interesting as we are moving into a work from anywhere situation. A couple of things here. What do companies need to do to prevent the talent war from happening? Number 1, you have to be as competitive as you can. And that not only includes pay, but beyond pay, it also includes perks and flexibility. We do a survey every year. We call it the Google Geist, and it's literally a company-wide survey about, almost everybody participates in that survey. And it takes about an hour to get through it, and there's a lot of detail collected. But one of the things that comes out of it is also how much do people value perks and flexibility to work from anywhere, which was a hot topic, obviously, this year in this survey, compared to just their pay packet. After being in the workforce for a while, maybe initially as you join a company after college, the pay packet decision is a more important one. But as you move into your roles and you reach a certain level where your pay is not really going to make or break your standard of living, that's where perks and flexibility become extremely, extremely important. And we've noticed this. People at this point don't leave the company even if a competitor is offering more pay because of the perks and flexibility that Google provides. So play with that ratio, right? You have 3 buckets and you're trying to find that optimal mix, and that might be different for every region that you're doing this for, but getting that right mix is so important. It can, one, save you a lot of money, but also help you keep the best employees because they value some of these more than others. The second one, providing a challenge. So beyond just the pay, perks, flexibility, which are more, I would say, logistical aspects of work, there's also this mental aspect of work, right? Are your employees thinking of their employment as a job, or are they really seeing this as their career? Do they have a career path that's charted out for them? How do their leadership teams talk to them when it comes to growth? So those fine skills really matter when it comes to preventing people from leaving one job and going to another job, but really saying, if you stay at our company, we will help you build your career. Another philosophy in terms of providing a challenge, it's a little bit controversial because it's hard for employees to be hired for a level when they need to perform for the next level. But at Google, we often hire for, let's say, level 6 when we are actually slotting that person in for level 5. So the pay, the perks, everything we provided at this current level, but the work we expect from that person on an industry average would be for the level above. And that's one, because we want to test that person before we promote them into the next level. But two, we feel if we don't challenge our employees to do better than what they are currently slotted in at, there's a little bit of a complacency that sets in, and we don't want that to happen to anybody. So striving towards the next level allows us to just sandbag them a little bit in the beginning, not in a negative sense at all, but it really helps motivate people. Another way to make work challenging is, and this comes from a philosophy from our founders, Larry Page and Sergey Brin. They were at Stanford University doing their PhDs, and they said, we don't always just sit in our classes and spend all our time, just going through lectures. We actually have a lot of free time outside of our classes to think, to network, to come up with new ideas. And they wanted to bring that same philosophy to Google, which they did by saying every employee is going to have 20% of their time to do whatever they want. I mean, not sit on the beach and, suntan, but really work on any project they want, even if it's not related to their core job. And I have done a few 20% projects myself. Sometimes they turn into full-time jobs if you so choose to. A lot of the products, in fact, that you may know from Google, like Google News, Google Maps, even Gmail, they would not have existed if it wasn't for this 20% time. So they started as these seed ideas where people would, let's say, take a Friday to work on that idea, or maybe 2 hours each day in the evening to work on this idea. And that's how these products grew. Once you have something solid in place, you ask the teams for more resources, and that's how they turned into actual products. So that type of challenge and that type of encouragement to do something outside of your core role is also really important in preventing other people to come and poach your employees. More recently, we have started something called Area 120. It is a Google internal incubator program where you can apply for it, and for 6 months, you are released from your core job. You can focus 100% time on Area 120, developing your project. And it's almost like a startup if it succeeds, and Google can absorb it back into the company. Sometimes you might want to run on it by yourself, and you can basically take that company and externalize it. So it's a way to develop talent from within the company as well. And then lastly, this might sound like a softer pillar, but having a mission, I cannot tell you how important that is to retention efforts. I don't know if any of you have been to the Google campus in Mountain View, but if you ever get the chance post-COVID, just walk around there and you can stop any employee and ask them what the company mission is. I can guarantee you every single person will be able to rattle off the company mission. And I don't think I can say this for many other companies. If I were to walk around global, corporate offices and ask their employees, what is your company mission? I don't think everybody knows that. But at Google, it was very important for us to make sure everybody who joins the company knows what the company mission is, but also aligns their own mission to that. So in addition to the company mission, everybody will be able to tell you why they are working at Google and how their work aligns to the overall work that the company is doing. So that creating that purpose really, really helps with keeping employees. I mean, take me as an example. It can't get more illustrative than this. I've been at the company for 17 years. Not to say I haven't interviewed at other companies in between, or I haven't gotten, headhunters reach out, but the reason I didn't leave is not because the pay wasn't better anywhere else. I have gotten better offers, but I didn't want to leave because my own mission aligned so well with the companies that those things didn't matter at some point anymore. So make it a corporate mission, make it a personal mission, and then also make it a universal mission that is broad enough. If you think of Google's mission, it's to organize the world's information and make it universally useful and accessible. Now, that is broad enough for us to keep adding new products, new services, and it to still apply to all of those things. So when you're designing your mission, whether it be the company mission or your personal one, make sure it's not a very short-term view of the company and where you're trying to head. Take a quick pause here, see if you have any thoughts, comments on this.
It sound like it.
No, all good. Right, no problem. Then we will move on to our next topic, which is managing a partly hybrid workforce. Now that again is a rather hot topic, and the two things I wanted to mention here is there are benefits to it, but there are also very many disadvantages to it. Now, before I walk into each of these points here, I will tell you what Google has decided to do. So once we are back in the offices, our plan is to test out what we call a hybrid work week, which means we will ask employees to come back into the office 3 times a week. And the other 2 days, they can work from wherever they wish. Now, what are the benefits of that? It allows us a lot of flexibility because we're setting this up as a test, and each VP or each manager at some point will have the discretion of saying, okay, maybe I don't need my employees to come in 3 days a week. Maybe they can come in 2 days or 1 day. Some others might say, I might need my team to come in 5 days a week. So calling it hybrid allows us to be more flexible once we have tested out how it works for each team. Another benefit is for some employees that live far away from the headquarters, they have always been asking for this flexibility, especially people with children. They're like, I can come in a few days, but I don't want to come in every day. So that allows, again, to increase our retention rates because we're offering that flexibility. And then 3, very clearly, it leads to reduced costs, not in terms of the overall real estate. We still have to maintain that footprint because we're not letting people permanently work from home. But we have a lot of benefits on campus in terms of cafeterias, classes, the gyms we operate. So the operational costs on those ends obviously go down when you only have about 60% of the workforce there. Now, the disadvantages are also not to be neglected. I feel there's quite a few, actually. We will lose some talent. In fact, many other companies in the Silicon Valley have announced that they're allowing permanent work from home. Some are even allowing international work outside of the United States, even if the company is headquartered in the US. And that is a big draw, especially for people in the Silicon Valley who are rather international. So some people are saying, okay, if I can do the same work, maybe not get the same pay, but at least do the same work and get a decent amount of pay from, wherever I come from, wherever my home country is, yeah, I will do that. And at Google, we won't have that flexibility, and that's why some people we might lose because of that permanent move away that's not possible. The second point here is, I think, far more important. When you have a hybrid workforce, and in this case, I'm not defining hybrid as everybody comes in 3 days and everybody can work from wherever for 2 days, but it's really a mix of some people decide to come to the office every day and some people decide to just work from Timbuktu for the rest of their lives, that becomes a problem in the sense of visibility. And we've had this discussion long, before we decided our 3-2 model, because what happens in this case is the people that are now permanently working from somewhere else don't have the same team visibility as their peers with their managers. Because if the manager decides to come in every day and their peers are coming in every day and you're the only one who's not, guess what? When it comes to calibration time, to performance review time, there is just a physical, an element of being physically there, being in the eyes of your manager, even if a lot of the work we do is digital, but that does make a difference. And that's where we saw people saying, I would be forced to come into the office even if I didn't want to, because I know that my visibility will drop. So that's a little bit of an issue to consider when you are dividing in permanent office and permanent home. And then also, there is going to be inconsistency across teams. We have asked every team to stay as close to the 3-2 model as possible so we can collect enough data to make sure that this is a model that is working. But the disadvantage is that, it's kind of the flip side of the flexibility for the business, is that some teams, for example, hardware or client-facing teams, they will have to be in the office when the clients are there or when the labs are open, and other teams will have more flexibility. So how do you then create an equilibrium between those two scenarios? So that's where our head is at, but I'd love to hear from you. What are you thinking for the future of your company?
I'm not sure I have an answer to that at the moment, but just kind of a question on is the decision to, as far as like the flexibility, as far as the hybrid and the 3 days or the 5 days or whatever, is that completely, that decision making, is that completely put on that individual manager, or are there other kind of factors that are involved in that decisioning?
So there is obviously a lot of this was first we surveyed our employees, right? It wasn't just a tops-down decision. We obviously wanted to make sure we hear what people want. So that's why we were actually one of the last few companies to announce what our future of work will look like. It took us a long time to figure this out. In terms of who makes the decisions, the company-wide recommendation is to keep it to a 3-2 model. Now, again, if some teams are working in a lab and they need to be there to operate the hardware, then they might mandate a 5 days in the office work week. And some other teams that are not client facing, and that maybe, some engineers just work better when they're working by themselves. So we have that flexibility built in. But I think department by department, we are going to see that, and I don't know what the number is going to be, but maybe not more than 10% try out a model different than the 3-2 model.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And we have another question.
Kristen had her hand raised as well.
Thanks, Ben. So 2 questions for you. One, when it comes to the concept that you were talking about before about the employees really closely aligning with Google's vision statement, and then that in fact informing their own vision statement. We at BDO and in the practice I work with, specifically advisory, have obviously undergone a lot of cultural change over the last several years as we've acquired and brought in new employees and new companies. So I'm curious how you guys have focused on enculturating that. Does it start in the onboarding process? How is that reinforced? Are people measured against it? How do you take it from the cascade of really aligning with with Google's vision statement to their own? If you could talk a little bit more about that. Yeah,
for sure. So one, it's obviously ensured in the hiring process. When I mentioned that cross-team interview. So basically, that entire interview is not at all about your leadership skills, about your role-related knowledge, about your cognitive ability. It's really about, if I had to work with you 8 to 10 hours a day, would we get along? Like, that's the only thing we test for there. And that already is a good indicator whether my thinking will. And it's not necessarily about hiring a clone of myself. Like, it's not, you don't have to have the exact same opinions, but will my ambition, will my drive reflect in what you bring to the team, right? That is what we're looking for there. So that's filter number one. Then we obviously have a very in-depth onboarding program. So there is regardless of where you get hired, you are flown into Mountain View, the headquarters, for 2 days to begin kind of like an onboarding program where you're given out all the information about the company, you're introduced to the new hires of that batch. And then there is depending on the team, like a 2 to 3 week onboarding program, and they teach you exactly where you can find the resources, what outside projects you can take on that are not necessarily related to your core role. And I think that's where the mission starts coming through, when employees realize that this is not just about driving revenue or launching a product, right? I'm working for a company that is really trying to help as many people as possible across the globe. And how can I bring my own ideas to that mission? And that's where a lot of people really start thinking about, okay, how am I going to write my own mission statement? Oftentimes it's discussed in one-on-ones with their managers, when they first meet them. So it's definitely part of writing out the objectives and key results, but it's also just how we live it on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. My second question goes to what you were just talking about in terms of the visibility concept. Kathy could probably speak to this more broadly from the firm, but at least some of the conversations that I had with some of our advisory professionals pre-COVID, certainly there was the concern, especially with some of the more senior leaders, that the perception if you were working out of the office might be, well, that you're not working or you're not as productive, and that flex time might be viewed in a negative light. I have certainly seen over the last 14 months a substantial shift in that. People who might have thought working hard meant working at your desk for 12 hours a day, absolutely now have seen that their teams can function virtually, their teams can function without being face-to-face every day. Certainly we would love to have some face time and hope that we're able to do that in the near future, but even some of the most hardlined leaders have really come around in terms of understanding that that hard work doesn't have to happen in an office. So I guess my question for you is, are you really seeing this concern that if I'm not in the office, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 4 days a week, I'm not going to get the same level of visibility or recognition that perhaps, my coworker who will receive, even if I'm doing a better job?
Yeah, so for right now, where everybody is working from home, that is not a concern at all. In fact, people, as you said, they are realizing some people just work better from home, or now that I have the flexibility to design my own workday, I can get more productivity out of myself. In fact, what I've seen on some of my teams is initially the first few months of COVID, when people were just getting used to working from home, like on a more permanent basis, the issue became people were overworking themselves because they were trying to prove themselves. And there's also this blindsidedness, right? When you're in the office, you know about what your other teammates are doing, right? You know how long they're in the office for, what projects they're working on. There's just more of that you can see. But when you're working from home, all by yourself in front of your computer, you don't know what the others are doing. You're like, oh my God, is he doing more than me? Is she doing more than me? Do I need to step up? And that created a lot of anxiety initially. But now the problem becomes when you are one of the few staying home, or even like 5-6 people of your team are staying home and the other 5-6 are going into the office. The problem becomes, what is my manager doing? If the manager is going into the office and seeing those 5-6 people and seeing what they're working on, there is a kind of a psychological perception that these people might be working harder than the ones that are at home. And that's the fear that employees have right now. We've seen this in our surveys. They're saying, if we are going to come up with a hybrid model, it has to be equitable in terms of don't give people the choice to be there all the time when other people have the choice to not be there all the time.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
And from our perspective, we actually just started having some discussions on this, and Kathy is on the phone, so or on the call, but and she could provide her input. We're still looking at it. And I think we need to define, okay, when are the times that our teams need to be working together? And when is it okay to disperse and work independently on a component of a project? And putting some clear guidelines out for our teams so people will understand, because similar to your organization, we did conduct a survey to say, okay, what would people like? And I think over 70% of our staff would like to work from home 2 days a week or more.
Mhm.
And we need to be cognizant of that. And I think the new normal, we don't know what it will be yet. And we'll settle out into it at some time in the next year or two as things return to some semblance of what things are going to look like in the future.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways that we are very confident will help us in managing that balance is every quarter we do our OKR process, which is objectives and key results. So at the end of the previous quarter, you sit down with your manager and you decide for the next quarter, these are my deliverables, these are the main projects I'm going to drive, and these are how we are going to measure those, right? And then you have a mid-quarter check-in, and then you have an end-of-quarter check-in with your manager on those. So that process is not going to change. In fact, you can just as easily do this when you're working from home, except now you have the flexibility of saying, you know, I might work on this over the weekend, or I want to take Monday off, you know, however you design your workday. That's, I think, where hiring becomes, again, very, very important. We are talking about very skilled, white collar, educated, highly educated employees, both for BDO and for Google. So leaving them with that management of their own time is less of an issue. I feel if I were to employ, and you know, I not to discriminate or anything here, but you know, maybe like younger students that have not had experience working in a job yet, that are just fresh out of college, maybe I cannot trust them with that much of flexibility just yet because they have never experienced what it means like to manage their time yet. So again, tenure, what type of role you're in, whether you require physical presence because of a lab or something, all of that is going to determine how well you can drive productivity from everyone.
So Aparajita, a quick question here for the global companies such as Google and BDO and some of my former employees. When you say office, does it actually mean like an office in the Mountain View? It can be office in New York, it can be office in Moscow, right? So how do you actually define for those global firms that I personally know a couple of people who moved from New York to Los Angeles, for example, for Google,
Yeah.
right? And I knew some people who moved from my previous employees from those metropolitan areas to the places where they still have the offices, but they're not centralized and they're not kind of working in the same office they used to do pre-pandemic. So how do you balance that? How do you balance that global footprint and the officeness of that global footprint?
Yeah, that's actually a very straightforward answer for us. So when we ask people to come in the office, it has to be the office that their role is assigned to. Reason being, half of our company is what we call the global business organization. 50%, about 50% of our employees are in that, and the other 50% are engineering and product. But let's say for the global business organization, there's a lot of client interfacing roles in that team. The teams need to be co-located close to where their clients are. So if I'm hired for the New York office, I cannot just decide to work out of the Chicago office and just say, hey, I'm working out of an office, you shouldn't care which one. Because the reason I was put in the New York office is because I am close to my New York clients. So that's half of the company. The other half of the company is also pretty straightforward. A lot of times our engineering teams are co-located because we believe, and we've always been that culture at Google, that running into each other in random places, you know, be it a micro kitchen or on the campus or in the cafes, it serves a purpose. It serves the purpose of innovation happening quicker. And there's just a nature of being in person that cannot be replicated through video conferences. And we hope to maintain that by having these people, even if it's just 3 days a week, but come in together in the offices that they're assigned to. Now, that doesn't mean that, you know, if I'm going on vacation to, I don't know, Greece, that I cannot work out of the Athens office for a week a year if that's what I want to do. But on a more permanent basis, that's not something we would intend to do.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any more questions?
No, but I will just make a note that Kathy, unfortunately, and she was disappointed, did get pulled away into something. So hopefully she'll be joining us soon. But if anybody's mentioning her, that's why she's not responding.
Yeah, we're also recording this. So
on the people policies. I'm just
What's that? Yeah.
I don't think she had a grasp on the people policies. I'm just kidding. She's our chief people officer.
Yeah.
Great, then let's talk about our last point here, which is around the success metrics. And I referred to this a little bit already with our objectives and key results, but to go over that again, this is a very, very important process at the company, and it is regardless of what level you're at, which role you're in, which organization you belong to, everybody does that. It is an annual process once for the company overall, and then it's broken out into quarters. And it happens tops down. So the CEO from there to the VPs, to the directors, decide what the company OKRs are. They're broken down then by department of the VP and so on and so forth until the very last individual contributor in the company. So very structured process. There's a tool that we have designed internally where you can enter your objectives and key results, and then you do your grading in the tool as well. It's also very transparent. We have a scale that we follow, we have a color coding that we follow. So if I were to, and it's so transparent that I could log into any other coworker's OKR system and I could see what are they working on this quarter and how are they grading themselves against it. So there's 100% transparency around that. And that really helps us stay in tune, not in the sense of accountability, that's not why we do it. It's more so we know what others are working on, and if there was an area of collaboration, just by reading what they're doing, then I have a way to reach out to them. On the other hand, we are firm believers in rewarding the output and not the process. In fact, we feel this is one of the key ingredients of why we are able to be innovative in the first place. And that includes allowing for failure. So when you give somebody very specific goals to reach, but you also tell them these are exactly the steps you need to take to get there, one, that becomes a very boring job. It's not challenging at all because you have no flexibility, but also it doesn't allow for failure because you're prescribing every single step. What we say is, I don't care how you get to your end result as long as you're producing the desired end result. So people become very creative all of a sudden. They come up with their own ways, own models of doing things, and that's where innovation really thrives. It's also fair for people with different work styles. As I mentioned, some people work better alone, some people work in teams. So we have engineers that used to come in at 12 o'clock, have lunch, and then start working, and then work until, I don't know, 10, 11 in the night. So however you want to design that flexibility should be there because people work differently. And then the guardrails that we have, at least on the business side of the organization, is while we expect a certain output, sales teams have quotas, we set guardrails, again, to allow for crazy ideas once in a while, right? There's a guardrail on how much you can make in terms of positive sales quota, like above and beyond. And then where would we set the floor that you cannot drop below? And again, that allows for sales teams to come up with new ways of trying to sell a product or designing new joint business plans with their customers. So having that flexibility built into the process has helped us get better results overall. And again, open for any thoughts and how you think about driving success metrics.
On the OKRs and the transparent piece of that, is that the only piece of the quarterly review process, or is there more of a private piece, if you will, that's between an employee and their manager?
Yeah, there is.
Okay.
There is what we call a performance review cycle. In fact, it just ended recently. It's 6 monthly. So every 6 months, there's a tool where it's a 360-degree review. So you review the people that you manage. You also review your manager, and then your peers review you. And it's a written review. You write your self-assessment. Everybody reads it, and then they comment on your self-assessment and what they have experienced with you. There's a couple of multiple choice questions, but mainly free flow text. And then based on that input, there's a calibration session at your team's level, which then goes up all the way to the VP level. And that's how the performance ratings of an employee are created. Obviously, the OKRs play into that because in that self-assessment, you would then write down, this is what I achieved this quarter, and that then goes into the rating. But it is a core element of how that overall performance review is done.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, and parts of that are private, parts of like whatever my peers are writing about me, only I can read. What my manager is writing about me, I can read. But there are certain parts of the upward manager feedback that everybody can read.
Does Google have any viewpoint or even your gut on what, as Steve mentioned it a few minutes ago, when the semblance of normalcy comes back and what that actually looks like and means? Do you have a viewpoint on that yet, or is that still kind of evolving?
In terms of what specifically?
Returning to specifically kind of returning to maybe more of a standard in an office format before, March of last year.
Yeah, again, we are trying this 3-2 model starting September is the guess right now when we'll be back in the offices. We hope that this is going to be a success. We don't know for sure. And if, let's say, after testing it for a quarter, we feel for some teams that's absolutely not working, we might ask them to come back. But at the same time, we have to be prepared that a lot of people might want to leave or change teams, at least if that's not the model that they want to work with. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah, thank you.
Any other questions that we might have?
How's that looking generally for your global offices? Do you encounter some of the same kind of pros and cons and feedback from your employees?
I mean,
Yeah, go ahead, please, Steve.
I was just going to say, as a firm, BDO is a global network. So every country is a separate entity. So most of our visibility would be into the US firm and what's going on here.
And are you envisioning a permanent work from home, hybrid? Do you have any early thoughts on that?
Yeah, like I said earlier, we're in the developmental stages, but I think that where we're going to end up landing is there's certain things that you have to be together. Like you mentioned, young staff, new hires. It's tough to train them in certain circumstances virtually. So we'll have to lay out in the different areas of the firm, and everyone is different, what makes the most sense with respect to people being together versus working remotely. And Kathy can provide insights into the process we're going through, but we're working on a communication plan to get out to our team probably later this summer. That'll document our policies and our procedures. I don't see us mandating people be in the office on a full-time basis unless they're in a unique role that requires that. I think we're going to have to be flexible.
Yeah, my personal guess is that a lot of what type of work will be done in the office still has to be figured out.
Right.
In a situation where you cannot come into the office because of health reasons, obviously everything was being done from home. But I'm pretty sure there will be certain meetings or certain brainstorming sessions that are just better done in person, which through that testing, we'll find out where do we have higher productivity if we do it in person versus remotely. And that will hopefully help us shape ideas on, okay, if you have a team that needs to meet twice a week for this particular meeting, please try to do it in person and the rest you could do remotely. But we don't know, we don't have that view of content yet. We only have a view of the logistics so far.
Yeah, and I think, you mentioned you don't know what people are doing if they're not there. Most of our staff and partners are billing clients. So you can measure productivity and how one person's doing versus another, whether they're in the office or remote. I don't think the office matters. And if you look at our business historically, a lot of our advisory team and our assurance team are out on client sites anyhow, so they're not in the office. And the tax folks are the ones that are predominantly in the office day in and day out.
Absolutely. Yeah. In the consulting business, that's always been the norm. So that is hopefully not that big of a shift. In our case, we'll obviously also have to consider the tax situation. We have seen a lot of questions come in from employees about, even right now, I'm working remotely from another state because or in my case, I'm working from another country, like how do we handle taxation? What does this mean in the long term? Will Google have to do something about it? Do we have to talk to our own CPA? So all of that we really haven't figured out yet.
Yeah.
Well, now you know a bunch of accountants if you need any advice.
Absolutely.
Awesome. I think this is it. So maybe we can take a quick 4-minute break and go back in the beginning of the hour. But Aprijita, thank you so much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to speak with you and talk about things that are happening in this very agile world that we live
Yeah,
in.
indeed.
So Aprijita, thank you so much and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, everyone.
Thank
Very a
you.
pleasure meeting you.